My friend Jamie always swore that this story was true. It was passed down from his dad's friend Kyle, a long-haul trucker who encountered something on the road one night that he would never speak of again. According to Jamie, Kyle had always been the type who didn't scare easily. He had spent most of his adult life hauling freight across the vast, lonely highways of America, witnessing countless strange occurrences on the road. But none of them had ever left him as shaken as what happened that night in the Arizona desert. It was a typical route, one Kyle had driven a dozen times before, but this particular night had an eerie stillness about it. It was around 2 a.m., and the desert was utterly silent. No sounds, no winds, just the faint hum of his truck engine cutting through the pitch-black night. The stars were bright, scattered like tiny diamonds across the dark sky, and the road stretched endlessly before him, vanishing into the darkness. It was the kind of night that made him feel like he was the only person left in the world. After hours of driving in that oppressive silence, Kyle spotted something unusual ahead, a flickering light, small but unmistakable. At first, he thought it might be a car pulled over on the shoulder, maybe someone in need of help. As he approached, though, he could see that it wasn't an ordinary vehicle. It was an old, rusted-out sedan, looking decades out of place on this deserted highway. The car's headlights were dim, and the paint had faded to a dull, ghostly gray. Standing beside the car was a woman, illuminated only by the faint glow of her own headlights. Her clothing struck Kyle as strange, a faded dress, the kind that might have been fashionable in the 1960s, and her hair was styled in soft curls that seemed untouched by the desert wind. She didn't wave him down or make any move for help. She just stood there, staring into the distance with an expression that seemed both vacant and unbearably sad. Against every instinct screaming at him to drive past, Kyle slowed down and pulled over a short distance from the car. He rolled down his window, his voice hesitant yet concerned. "Need any help, ma'am?" he called out, his words feeling hollow in the vast desert silence. The woman turned slowly, almost mechanically, to face him. When her eyes met his, a chill spread through Kyle's body like ice water. Her eyes were dark, unnervingly hollow, as if they held secrets older than time itself. For a long, agonizing moment, she just stared at him, not saying a word. Kyle felt an overwhelming sense of dread, his skin crawling under her gaze, yet he couldn't look away. He opened his mouth to speak again, to ask if she was okay, but no words came out. Then, without warning, she took a step toward him. Kyle's heart pounded as he instinctively reached for his truck door handle, torn between the urge to help and a desperate need to escape. But before he could make a decision, something strange happened. The temperature around him dropped sharply, and the air felt thick, almost suffocating. He could see his own breath misting in front of him, an impossible phenomenon in the sweltering desert heat. Kyle's instincts finally took over, and he yanked his truck door closed, his hands shaking as he shifted into gear and sped off, leaving the woman standing alone on the roadside. His eyes were glued to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see her disappear into the night. But as he glanced back, his heart nearly stopped. There she was, no longer on the roadside, but now seated in the back seat of his truck, her eyes still fixed on him with that same unrelenting gaze. Panic surged through Kyle's body. He pressed harder on the gas, his truck barreling down the empty road as fast as it could go. His mind raced with thoughts of how this was even possible, of how she could have appeared there without him hearing a sound. But no matter how fast he drove, she remained in the mirror, watching him with an intensity that seemed to pierce right through him. The rest of that night was a blur. Kyle remembers little beyond the overpowering sense of dread and the woman's haunting eyes watching him from the rearview mirror. He drove for miles, his grip white-knuckled on the wheel, until finally, as dawn broke over the horizon, he dared to glance in the mirror one last time. She was gone. When he reached his destination, he sat in his truck for a long time, too shaken to move. He never spoke of that night again, only telling his closest friends to avoid that stretch of highway if they ever found themselves in Arizona. He left the trucking industry soon after, and to this day the story remains a closely guarded secret among those who know him. They say if you drive through that desert at night, you might see her too, waiting by the side of the road, her hollow eyes searching for the next soul to join her in the lonely desert night. Some believe she's the spirit of a woman who died on that road years ago, forever trapped in a purgatory of her own making, longing for a release that will never come. Others think she's something far darker, an ancient entity that preys on the unsuspecting, drawn to those who travel the desolate road alone. So if you ever find yourself driving down that isolated stretch, remember Kyle's story. Keep your eyes on the road, don't look in the rearview mirror, and whatever you do, don't stop. Because out there, in the silent depths of the desert, something may be waiting, watching, biding its time until the next soul wanders into its grasp. As Kyle's story fades into the early light of dawn, you might be left wondering if this desert encounter was an isolated incident, or if there are countless others lingering out there on the empty roads, waiting for their own mysterious stories to unfold. If you want more tales like this, stay close. Who knows, maybe one day your story will be the one we share.